Hello everyone. Today's video is going to be me going through the nature-nurture debate. Full disclosure, I filmed this for about 25-30 minutes and then accidentally deleted the whole video. So this is the second time I'm filming this, so if I become angry at any point, then that's probably why. We know the nature-nurture debate already. You probably do know, you know it certainly to the basics, right? So when we're talking about nature-nurture, we are talking about the debate about what is the cause of our behavior. So whether our behavior comes from more biological processes like genetics, and that'd be nature, or whether our behavior is a result of our nurture, our upbringing, for example. So there are a few terms I would need you to know. So nature and nurture being one of them, obviously. But this is, like I say, a philosophical debate. Now, we will cover the philosophical origins of this debate, though you do not necessarily actually need to know them. So Descartes, Plato, Locke, for example, all of these philosophers, which I'm going to go through, with the exception of Locke, you don't really necessarily need to know them to too much detail. Now, the the debate, as it says here, the debate centers on the relative contributions of genetics and environment to human development. That is more what the debate is nowadays. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail. So let's start with the first bit, nature. When we're talking about nature, we're obviously talking about anything that is genetic, anything that is biological or hereditary or passed down. So there is the argument that our physical appearance, our personality, our psychological behaviors, like determination, motivation, confidence, self-efficacy, all of these things. There is an argument that that comes from nature, so our biological genetic processes. Now, anyone who is on the nature side of this debate is a nativist. Nativism is the official name for the nature side. So you would argue that, the dopamine hypothesis is a nativist theory. The dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia. The faulty caudate nucleus theory of OCD is a very nativist theory because it's coming from the nature side of things. Nurture, on the other hand, is this idea about anything environmental that is affecting your behavior. So you're looking at mainly childhood experiences, how we were raised, our peer relationships, our culture, all these things that are in our environment that are affecting us. That's what we mean by nurture. So in terms of what nurturists are called, they are essentially empiricists. So empiricism means a couple of things, but empiricism, one of the semantic meanings of empiricism, refers to a nurture argument. Social learning theory is incredibly empiricist because it says your environment, in this case the observation of your role models, plays a big impact. Behaviorism, operant classical conditioning, that is also empiricist as well. So a couple of new terms there ready for you. So as promised, one thing I do want to do is I do want to go through the philosophical origins of the nature-nurture debate. So let's start with nature. Right here, we're looking at Plato and Descartes. Descartes is the top one, I believe. Plato is the bottom one. Both of these were nativists. They believed that behavior, these were the first people to suggest that behavior was passed down from an hereditary point of view, and that it wasn't parenting or anything like this, but certain behaviors were encased in genes or caused by genes, and these were among the two first people to kind of say that. Really, Darwin also did this, right? So Darwin is not so much a philosopher, more of a scientist, but Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, again kind of drove this behavior home, that actually a lot of our physical appearance, certainly a lot of our physical appearance, but also the stuff that we do, i.e. our behavior, is actually determined by genetics in this case, or evolution. So those were the 2 or 3 nativist philosophers. The big empiricist philosopher was John Locke, an English philosopher who believed in tabula rasa. Now, tabula rasa is, I think, is Latin or Greek or French for, I think it's Latin, for blank slate. So most of the students I teach believe in nurture over nature. A lot of students believe in this idea about a blank slate, that at the moment we are born, we are all exactly the same as each other. Yes, we have different genes, and sure, they play some role, but the main factor is that we are all a blank slate. And the second that umbilical cord is cut, our experiences start to write upon the slate and define who we are. Now, that is the main concept of the blank slate. I full disclosure, I do believe mostly in a blank slate. I do believe we are pretty much the same when we're born. There's not that much difference. Yes, our genes are causing us to look different, although really, do babies look that different? Really? They're all the same. They're fat, they're mostly bald, they're a little bit like me. Anyway, so empiricists believe that obviously things like social learning theory, behaviorism, that actually our behavior comes from our surrounding environments, and that actually our biology plays a pretty small role. Now, another, not a philosopher, but a psychologist in this case, John B. Watson, said one of what I think is the greatest quotes ever. And look, what I'm about to read you is an incredibly nurture quote, right? It says that your biology doesn't mean anything really. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed. So, what he's saying there is, physically well formed, so no disabilities. Even though he didn't actually need to say that, because anyway. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one of them at random and train them to be any type of specialist I might select: doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggar, person, and thief, regardless of their talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of their ancestors. What Watson is basically saying there is the environment is king. I could raise anybody. And if I give them an optimal environment to grow, I can make them into any profession. And that is an incredibly nurture argument. I really like this quote, and it's something I as a teacher really believe. I as a teacher do not believe that you have an intelligence ceiling, like a bit to your intelligence that you cannot genetically or biologically break through. The nature argument suggests that you can. The nature argument suggests that your intelligence is largely or entirely determined by you. But I believe that whilst nature does play a role, whilst I do believe some of you are more naturally talented academically than others, I think with hard work anybody can actually achieve an A star. And that's a personal opinion. Now, all of this is A1 so far: nature, nurture, heredity, empiricism, nativism. All of this is A1. This is also A1. So one thing that's worth noting down, because I think this might get lost, is actually only a few people are now extreme in this argument. Only a few people are extremely nativist or extremely empiricist. Most people now agree that nature and nurture contribute and determine human behavior. Most people agree with that. The debate has moved on, okay? Where they debate is the extent to which nature or nurture contribute? I personally think nurture is more important than nature. I think nature is, quite important, particularly in how we look, but I don't think it plays that much of a role compared to nurture. But I do accept it does play a role. The trouble is, how can you separate out biology from environment? How can we see that? Well, one way, and you do need to know this, and this is A1 again, is that a way to study the nature-nurture debate is to actually use twin studies. And twin studies can obviously be used comparing MZ twins to DZ twins. So if I were to look at the intelligence, for example, if I were to look at the intelligence of two MZ twins and see how similar they are to DZ twins, I would be able to see how much intelligence is actually genetic, for example, or biological or environmental. So that would be how I use it. Now, this would go in your AO1, by the way. You need to put in your AO1 about how nature-nurture debate is analysed and researched, and it is through twin studies. But a problem with twin studies is that we all know twins. You probably had some at school. You probably, maybe you are a twin yourself. MZ twins, monozygotic / identical twins, are raised so similarly. How can you separate out their genes from how they are treated? If you're saying that, I've got two twins, Dan and Sam, right? They're both the two identical twins. Oh, they're both very similarly intelligent. They're twins. It must be biological. Well, they've gone to the same school. They probably have the same friends. They've been raised the same. So it's the same parenting, for example. How can you say that their similar intelligence is biology when they've been raised exactly the same? So a way around this is to split twins up, although apparently that's quite unethical. We're not allowed to do that, right? Unless, although people still do. So worth knowing. More AO1 is genotype and phenotype. So there's plenty of AO1 to talk about here. And you do have to have a pretty decent idea about what genotypes and phenotypes are. Now let's start with genotype. That's by far the easiest. Genotype is literally what genes you have. It is the makeup, the composition of your individual genetics. So you have between 20 to 25,000 genes. They're probably unique. They're probably unique, and all of these 25,000 are completely varied. You'll have some genes, but the person who is closest to you right now, either someone in the library or someone in the next room, maybe brother or sister, they have other genes to you, for example. Genotype is literally what genes you have. Phenotype is a bit more complicated. People then think phenotype is environment. No, it's not. Phenotype is the observable behaviors that are seen as a result of genes and environment interacting with each other. Hair color is a good example. You might have it in your genotype for your hair to be brown, but say you go away for a summer to Australia and you spend a lot of time working in the farms out there, you spend a lot of time in the sun, your hair is going to become blonder. And the phenotype is the blonde hair. It's the observable behaviors. It's the observable characteristics. So your hair is blonde because of an interaction between your genes and your environment in this case. So, for example, hair color can be determined by genetics and interactions with the environment. That's more AO1, right? This is another bit of AO1, and this is probably the more complex part of it, but also probably the most important part. So, researchers want to establish a heritability coefficient for every behavior. What that means is to find out the exact extent to which that behavior is caused by either genes or either environment. And this is on a scale. So it's heritability is how much of a variation seen in a certain trait is either genetic or environmental. If you score a high heritability, so a score near 1, that means that a large part of that behavior is caused by genetics. Heritability runs from 0 to 1. So please note that 0 is entirely environmental, not caused by your behavior at all. 1 is entirely heritable, genetic. Sorry to tell you this, but research consistently shows that actually intelligence is between 0.7 and 0.8 in adults. What that means is your IQ is between 0.7 and 0.8 inherited. If I can phrase this another way, your intelligence is about 70 to 80% inherited from your parents. So if you had parents who are below the national average in intelligence, that's a nice way to put it, there is a strong chance that you will be as well. Now, the environment does take up about 25% of your intelligence. So let's say you've got unclever parents, but you're a hard worker. You had great teachers. You had access to resources like libraries and stuff. You were a resilient kid. You failed tests and then come back really well. That 25% can actually take you a lot higher. Could you then pass on that higher intelligence to your children, for example? So I am sorry to tell you, but your intelligence is largely, though not entirely, inherited. And this is a really, really good example about trying to figure out, okay, behavior is nature and nurture, but to what extent? The heritability coefficient scale allows us to be able to determine how much, because let's face it, behavior is probably not 50-50 inherited, if 50-50 inherited or environment. In this case, behavior, like intelligence, seem to be mostly inherited. But that's a really, really good AO1 to bring in. This is the AO2, but I'm not too concerned about this at this stage. Most of what we look at is both either nature or nurture. But where I want to focus for a bit is evaluations. So if I were you, I would get to know these 4 evaluations. Firstly, the argument has evolved, right? It's no longer the nature versus nurture debate to an extent. Now it is how much is nature, how much is nurture. Everybody, 99% of psychologists agree that behavior is a mixture of both. Clear point to also use. There is mass support for both sides of this debate. There is huge support. So if you're kind of talking about a debate, I would argue here that the debate needs to move on because there's clearly mass support. Bandura supports nurture. Skinner, Pavlov support nurture. Gottsman, the dopamine hypothesis, so on and so forth. Faulty caudate nucleus, they support nature. There's so much evidence on both sides that actually I think we need to move the debate on a little bit from nature versus nurture. And what we need to move on to, and this is a separate point altogether, we need to start seeing the interactionist approach as the main approach here, right? It clearly is nature and nurture. So we need to go back and view all behavior. Why are we still having this debate? It clearly is nature versus nurture. One of your evaluations should be, we need to move on and start focusing on interactionism being the clear indication of behavior. You also probably want to think about epigenetics. I'm going to say epigenetics is an extension point here, but epigenetics, and this is really basic, and I'm sorry if you do biology and I'm butchering it, but epigenetics is basically the concept that what you do in your environment has an impact upon your genes at a molecular level. Let me give an example. Let's say I started training. I play tennis quite a lot, but let's say I started playing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Right? Tennis, 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 tennis. That would, in the long term, have an effect upon my genetics, my body build, for my body shape, for example, my athleticism, my metabolism. All of these things would be impacted on a genetic level. I then pass those genes off to an offspring. Now they are like a very, very strong tennis player. So epigenetics is a new idea, but it's a form of interactionism. Right? Please note that down. And the last point I would want you to think about here, it could be suggested that the nature debate is more socially sensitive than the nurture debate, a classic comparison point. Nature debate is offensive because it suggests that behavior is destined for us and there's nothing we can do about it. Whereas the nurture debate suggests that if you change your environment, you can actually change behavior. So if you have an environment which is going to encourage schizophrenia, you can change that environment and not get schizophrenia. Whereas the genetic explanation of schizophrenia is, oh shit, you're going to get schizophrenia. So quite offensive. As an alternative extension, it might be worth looking up Plumin's niche picking. Niche picking is a little bit like epigenetics, though slightly different. If you're aiming for that A star, I would want you to know about Plumin's niche picking theory. It's very easy. It's very easy. And here we have a quite a good point actually about how this debate is becoming increasingly obsolete. You need to read these model peels. You need to understand where I'm coming from, and you need to understand, particularly with debates, by the way, how to peel a debate. Last thing, I promise. This is where all the approaches line up when compared to nature versus nurture. Nurture should be over here. Obviously, the most natural approach, the most nature-led approach is obviously biological. Completely disregards environment, whereas the learning theories do not completely they completely regard the environment and they completely disregard biology. Cognitive is absolutely in the middle, but what I would say about psychodynamic and humanistic is they are both nature nurture, but slightly one more than the other. Psychodynamic is more nature because it says, id, ego, superego, everybody has them, for example. Everybody has psychosexual stages. Everybody has defense mechanisms. These are nature. This is built in. This is inbuilt. It's innate in us. But then they go, yeah, childhood's important, which is clearly nurture, right? Humanism is the same as psychodynamic, but on the opposite footing. Mostly nurture. Mostly nurture. Though if you look down the bottom of Maslow's, yeah, but basic physical needs, everyone has those. Nature, right? So, you do kind of need to know that. In terms of exam questions, I will briefly show you what you might want to expect because it could be anything. If we have a look at this top one just here, that's pretty simple. What is meant by nature-nurture debate in psychology? 2 marks. Boom. Boom. Easy. Anyone can do that. Shit, you could have done that half an hour ago before you watched this video. You could have answered that question. You may be asked to apply it. So they may give you a stem here and they may just say, identical twins at this score, non-identical twins at this score. What does this mean for the debate? Right? Or they may, much more likely, if I'm going to be honest with you, hit you with a 16 marker. There are 2 16 markers just here. Both of them kind of the same. This one here says to refer. So you have to apply this one. So you have to apply nature nurture to anything from the spec. This one is just pure AO1 and AO3. So that's worth keeping an eye out for. As far as I'm aware, that is everything. So in your AO1, you're looking at what nature is, what nurture is, examples for both. Genotype, phenotype, epigenetics, heritability coefficient scales, twin studies. There's a lot of AO1 you could talk about. Those are, I just named 7 or 8 things there. I would absolutely talk about all of those if you got a 16 marker. So that is it for the nature and nurture debate. As always, hope it was useful. Click, like, subscribe. I hate myself.